I am so thrilled to have joining us for today's first conversation, David Nabarro, who wears many hats. We're so thrilled to have you with us. You're just the perfect person to set the stage for our two-day event ahead of the pre-summit. So thank you so much for joining us, David. It's great to see you.
And lovely to be here. I have to interrupt you because Teresa, you and me have done a few of these before, but this is the big one. And so I'm really glad to be with you for this moment.
Thank you so much. I know it's been quite a busy time, and obviously we are just ahead of the pre-summit itself. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on this particular moment that we find ourselves in. Why is now the time for this UN Food Systems Summit? Obviously pre-summit this month, summit itself in September. Why is now the time that we need this?
Thanks for asking. In 2015, world leaders came together and agreed on an extraordinarily far-reaching plan for the future of our world and her peoples. It's the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It's the only plan we have for the future. And it's a plan that looks at human development, economic development, and environmental development, all wrapped up together. There are 17 goals and 169 targets. And for most of those here with us today, these are super familiar. But I think it's important that I stress to you that that whole Sustainable Development Agenda is a very new and a very important creation. We don't have another world, so we have to look after this world carefully. And we don't have another plan for the future of the world, so we need to pay attention to that plan. But what's really important about the 2030 Agenda, the plan I'm referring to, with its 17 Sustainable Development Goals, is that all world leaders have agreed it, and many countries are using the Sustainable Development Goals as their compass for where they're trying to get to. Now, but there's one big problem, Teresa, and that is that if we go on as we are right now, particularly with regard to food and energy, it's going to be really hard for the world to achieve the SDGs, which means that the prospects for our grandchildren's generation and the generations that follow them don't look so good. So as we look ahead and consider our legacy and the world that we will be leaving, we have to really focus on the big issues that are still not properly resolved. One of those is food. Quite simply, if we get food right, then the SDGs will be achieved. If we get food wrong, then actually it's going to be very hard indeed to have the world that we need and want for the future.
I think that is such a perfect summary of the moment we find ourselves in and the stakes really, of the SDGs themselves. You also, one of your many hats has obviously been involved with the response to the COVID pandemic as well. Yeah. And from your perspective, what has that done to, this urgency that you just laid out that, frankly, we were feeling before we had a global pandemic, and now we have COVID on top of everything else?
And COVID, honestly, is focusing minds everywhere in the most extraordinary way. I don't think it necessarily means that suddenly everything can be solved, however remarkable that would be. But what it is doing, but it is showing us, Teresa, really the enormity of the challenges that are faced, particularly by poorer people in our world. Because what we see as a result of COVID is just the enormous number of people who are performing key functions on which all of us depend, but who generally tend to be invisible. The thousands and thousands of people who are migrant workers helping to produce the food that we eat, harvesting it from the fields, or the many thousands who actually prepare the livestock products that are consumed, cutting up meat so that it can be sold, often in very difficult circumstances, all the people involved in transportation of food, all the people involved in getting the supermarkets working, added it all together, there are hundreds of millions of people working on food that we tend not to see, that we tend not to hear about. But during COVID, we realized how massively important they are. They were the essential workers who had to keep working, even though the rest of us were actually staying at home to try to avoid getting the disease. But they are often poorly paid. They often live in quite unsatisfactory circumstances. And they tend to be people who've come into countries from outside, perhaps as part of labor gangs, and they don't always have very good living conditions. Sometimes they have to actually go right out on a limb to negotiate better living and working conditions. So what's happened is COVID is reminding us these people are there, because many of them got super sick, particularly early on when there were problems in processing factories for meat and fish and vegetables and sandwich making and so on. So what COVID does is it tends to reveal difficulties. And that was just one example. We've also seen COVID revealing the challenges faced by farmers in getting to market. We've seen COVID reminding us just how hard it is for poor people to get food when they suddenly ran out of money, as happened when many countries went into lockdown last year. Altogether, COVID is the great revealer. And I think that's why so many countries really want this food systems summit to be a success, because it's been a big wake-up call, COVID, and they want to get things right.
And as you are looking ahead and looking at the outcomes that you want to see out of this summit, whether it's, on behalf of multilateral organizations or the country governments you just mentioned, what are some of the outcomes that you are looking for out of this entire process?
Number one, food is more than what we grow or what the Ministry of Agriculture is focused on. It's vital what the agriculture sector does, but food also touches health. Food touches environment. Food touches everything to do with gender. Food is very important for young people, mostly because they're not going into food in quite the number that they ought to. So first thing is, let's treat food as an issue that goes right across different sectors of government. Perhaps the most important sector that's got to be there is the health sector, because if we don't get food right, it can make us sick. Second, I want to be sure that all the different stakeholders who have a role in food are really realizing that they are systems actors and they've got to be involved in it. Thirdly, I want us to be comfortable about treating food as a systems issue, one where so many different issues are deeply interconnected. And lastly, I want to be sure that in our food work, we put poorer people right at the center. The people whose children are likely to get malnourished, the people who are not able to hold down jobs, the people who are struggling sometimes just to get enough money to keep themselves from day to day. Let's get them at the center. Let's try to make sure that food systems serve them and their children, and make sure then that we're actually creating a community that is healthier, better nourished, stronger, looking after the planet in a more steward-like way. Let's get all that right, and let's get this summit to help us get in that direction. Teresa, there's never been a food systems summit before organized by the United Nations. It's time to have one. And I think on the basis of what I'm seeing from around the world, particularly through the food systems dialogues, that this will actually happen, and we will start to treat food truly as a systems issue.
And unfortunately, we've only got 30 seconds left, so this is a big question for only 30 seconds. But how is the global community going to track the commitments made at the summit, and how will we determine if this whole process has been a success?
So short, we'll do it within the context of the existing tracking mechanisms that we have, the high-level political forum, but I suspect countries and other stakeholders will introduce new trackers so that we have special food trackers. That wouldn't surprise me. We need it. They have to work out how to do it. But don't you worry. Things won't be the same after the summit in September this year. They'll be better.
Thank you so much, David, for those words. This was a great way to start out our event. I am so pleased you could join us today. Thank you so much.
Always my pleasure. You know, I'm such a fan of Devex, and invite me again, please.
Oh, we certainly will. Thank you.
Thank you.